Well, a very warm welcome to our session this afternoon, Finding Your Calling in the Workplace. I'm Justin Irving, and we'll be helping to moderate our conversation today with Jon Bonkoski, a Bethel MBA graduate and someone who's become a good friend of Work with Purpose, and we're really excited to introduce to you today. A little bit about Work with Purpose to begin with. Work with Purpose is an initiative that is connected to Bethel Seminary and Bethel University. And Work with Purpose's goal is really focused on engaging and empowering individuals who want to understand the value of everyday work. I have the pleasure of being the director of this initiative, and as you can see, there are a few other roles that I have, teaching ministry leadership and leading our Doctor of Ministry program. But one of the things that excites me about Work with Purpose is that we're seeking to leverage this conversation about the importance of integrating faith and work into our lives from this perspective of the church. So maybe you have had a different perspective in your church over the years, but sometimes individuals are not hearing on a Sunday morning or in their small group context the value of what they're doing Monday to Friday in their normal everyday work lives. And so as an initiative, Work with Purpose, we're seeking to engage both future pastors in the seminary context, but also current pastors as they think about what people are doing in their lives and what does kingdom ministry look like, not only in the church proper, but in the church scattered, when people are living out their lives of faith on a daily basis. What we're really talking about is the concept of whole life discipleship. People live their lives out over the course of their lifetime in the context of work, which represents over 100,000 hours of their lives. We at Bethel Seminary want to believe that that investment, the investment of those 100,000 hours, matters immensely. Well, Jon Bonkoski is a person who gets this in his life. We had the pleasure of getting to know Jon in the environment where he was participating in something we call our 100,000 hour reading colloquy group. Now, this is representing that 100,000 hours that we spend over our lifetime in the context of work. Jon was a participant in this group and sought to bring his experience in the marketplace together with his academic studies together to reflect on why faith and work should not be two separate things lived out in diverse spheres of our lives, but brought together integratively. What does it mean to be a whole life individual, living out a life of faith in the context of family, in the context of friends, in the context of the church, and in the context of our everyday work lives? We're excited to hear from Jon today, and so I'm going to hand things over to Jon, who has some introductory thoughts for us, maybe 15-20 minutes of presentation material to help you get an angle on faith-work integration from his life. We're going to hear about his life from a personal perspective, from a work perspective, and from a faith perspective. And maybe be jotting down some notes, because we're going to have some time of Q&A after we hear from Jon. That's what this chat box is going to be available for, as you note on your screen. You'll be able to share some questions that you have for Jon and myself that we'll engage towards the end of this presentation time. So Jon, thanks for being with us. We're looking forward to hear about how you've lived out your faith in the context of Mortenson Construction, and how you have come to really see a life not as faith and work in separate worlds, but seeing them as integrative dimensions of your life. Thanks for being with us here today, Jon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Justin, for that kind introduction, your words, and it's been my pleasure to have taken a part and joined in on the Work with Purpose initiative here at Bethel, as well as taking it outside the walls of Bethel University and Seminary. And I'll talk a little bit more about my engagement with the Work with Purpose initiative kind of throughout the presentation. So I'll leave it for that, but just really appreciate the work that you, Justin, and Tessa and others are doing as a part of the initiative to get the word out that what we are all doing is to serve Christ, no matter where we're called in our context. So with that, I will get started. So this is the Work with Purpose initiative, and how do I advance the... Hold on just a second. There we go. What we're going to talk about today, or what I'm presenting on, the who, what, where, why, how. Who am I? What does integration life look like, a holistic life? Where does integration occur? Why it matters, and how to apply this integration and calling into your specific context where you are today. So a little bit about me and my faith background. So currently I'm a member at Emmanuel Covenant Church in Shoreview, Minnesota, serve on the elder board there, as well as serve in various ministries, but co-team leader of the Connect team at church, and which focuses on trying to get people connected into and feel welcomed at Emmanuel. I also serve on the larger Evangelical Covenant Church denominational executive board in Chicago, and specifically on the finance committee secretary service there. A little bit more about me and my life. So this is my beautiful family, my wife Emmy, my daughter Brianna and Carl, and we are an upper Midwest, North family. So I was born in South Dakota. I've spent time living in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois, but by far my favorite and my heart is in Minnesota, which is where I currently am. So that's a good thing. A little bit more about my life. So these are some areas that I volunteer and spend time with. Spark Cadence is a consulting practice that I co-founded with a friend of mine. I will talk about that a little bit later. At Bethel University, I'm a board member of the Business and Leadership Advisory Board, and also I'm integrated into the Work with Purpose initiative, and I'm passionate about connecting Bethel alumni, specifically in the business area, and the Master of Business and the business programs. And then I've began in a Faith Life Work integration blog, and you can find it at faithlife.work. And I also volunteer as a board member on the ACE Mentor Twin Cities. ACE stands for Architecture, Construction, Engineering in the Twin Cities, and I was a previous lead mentor at Washburn High School and Irondale High School in Minneapolis and New Brighton. So a little bit about my education and work, and you'll see I'm not just saying these things to say, who I am and just arbitrary information, but it all weaves together and connects in. So I just talked about life, now I talk about work. And so education, I started my education at Bethel University a few years ago, and met my beautiful bride Emmy here at Bethel in our first week, actually, welcome week at Bethel. And so spent 2 years at Bethel University, and felt a nudging to go into something a little bit more specific. And so I transferred into Dunwoody College of Technology in Minneapolis, and achieved an associate's degree in architectural drafting and estimating from there. So you'll see with this graphic as it's built out, it's a little bit complicated, but I started at a 4-year university, then went to a 2-year university, and from there got hired with Mortenson Construction, which is a national construction firm. I think we're currently ranked either 16th or 17th largest in the country. We're the largest sports builder in the country, the first or second largest wind turbine and solar panel installer in North America, the 6th largest healthcare contractor in the country, so on and so on. So pretty large. And I started in Chicago with Mortenson. So graduated Dunwoody, Minneapolis, moved to Chicago, and from there, while at Mortenson, I finished my 4-year degree at North Park University, and achieved my bachelor's in organizational management and leadership. So that was while I was working full-time. And while I was working full-time at Mortenson, I felt a tug in my heart that I should be doing something more. I felt like God had a bigger purpose for my life than just being at Mortenson. And so I actually started at North Park Seminary. I had put Mortenson employment on pause and had an agreement in place with my boss at the time in Chicago to pause my employment with Mortenson, start seminary at North Park, and my very first class was intense Greek, and it was intense. And I lasted 3 days and realized quickly that that was not what I was supposed to be doing. But meanwhile, I had paused my employment, and I was going to go back and work part-time after this intensive Greek course. and work part-time at Mortenson while I then was in seminary full-time. So I asked my boss back in Chicago if I could come back and work for Mortenson full-time, because seminary just didn't feel like it was the right thing. And by the way, I was a Kern scholar, and so I had 100% of my tuition that would have been reimbursed, free seminary, which is something that I didn't take lightly, and something that you don't just turn down free tuition very often. But I felt deeply that it was not my calling to be in seminary at the time. And so I went back to Mortenson. They took me back with open arms, and I said, I'd like to come back to Mortenson. However, I'd kind of like to come back to Mortenson and move to Minneapolis. And my boss in Chicago said, we'd love to have you back, and I'll make a phone call. And he did, and made it work. And they moved me and my wife back to Minneapolis. And my wife was working at Mortenson at the time in our marketing group. They created 2 spots for us back in 2008. And in fact, it was September of 2008. So for those of you remember what was happening with our financial markets right exactly at that time in September, right before some of the large banks that were too big to fail failed. Mortenson created 2 spots for us. They moved us back home, and I was in Minneapolis, in our estimating group in Minneapolis, working on a lot of large national projects for our federal contracting group, our sports group, and some healthcare projects at the time. And again, about a year or so into my transferred employment to Minneapolis with Mortenson, I felt the tug again for seminary. And so I looked into Bethel Seminary, which I have a lot of connections at Bethel, a lot of friends that have gone here, previous pastors that have gone here. And at the time, Bethel was starting up a new urban initiative, an urban seminary degree, and they were offering a 50% discount that I qualified for. So I signed up. I was ready to go. I was going to do the 7 p.m. thing, the Monday night seminary degree, while working at Mortenson full time. And I lasted about a month, and it didn't feel right. And it just wasn't what God had for me. So I'd already turned down 100% tuition reimbursement. This time I turned down 50% tuition reimbursement because it wasn't the right thing. And that was me trying to listen intently to God's, and the Holy Spirit's still small voice in my life. And with that, he spoke into my life and moved me into a different group within Mortenson, still in Minneapolis, but focusing on design phase management, at all the aspects of the design phase for a construction project before it actually is in the ground and shovels in the ground. I work and am currently in this position where I help the architect, the engineers, our customer, really dream and formulate the right project and put it into place and put it onto paper, or these days into the computer, before it's actually put into the ground. So I help coordinate and quarterback the design phase efforts for our large healthcare projects, and currently am leading design phase on a $500 million hospital development in Rockford, Illinois. So a couple of years ago, I still had this tug for a master's degree of some kind, and talking with my wife Emmy, we realized that we think it was a business degree, and so I looked into different masters of business programs, U of M and Bethel and others in the Twin Cities and around the nation, and really landed on Bethel University. Really just felt at home with what Bethel's really main focus was on a Christ-centered education, along with an ethical focus woven throughout each and every single course, not just one course on ethics, but woven throughout. And for me, my Master of Business Administration, that process over the last 2 years, I graduated last May, that process was a self-discovery process for me. And that for me, and why you see the light bulb there, that's where the light bulb went off, where I really felt at home in the business place, in the marketplace, and had a full awareness that in the marketplace is where God has called me and placed me to be. So with that, self-discovery during the Master of Business program. So there were a number of things that contributed to this self-discovery of kind of who I am and who God created me to be. First one was just encouragement from others, mainly my wife, to pursue this master's degree. We had 2 small kids at the time. I was working more than full-time at Mortenson, way more than 40 hours a week, and had other commitments I was involved with as well. They're volunteering involvements. But she was a strong cheerleader for me to go into and complete my MBA. And without her support, I would not have done it, as well as listening to other friends of mine, those of influence within my life that I really trust. My trusted advisors were encouraging me as well to pursue this MBA. And then during the MBA, the very first class, the leadership class that kicks off the program, fantastic, and starts with 4 assessments that we take to learn more about ourselves. Strengths Finder, personal leadership strengths that Bethel puts together, as well as emotional intelligence, and then also another customized leadership assessment. And looking at those 4 assessments, analyzing the results, and understanding where my strengths lie and where my weaknesses or areas of improvement are really helped me understand who I was and who God created me to be. And then the third one is the business alignment. Again, really feeling that full sense of calling to be in the marketplace and not necessarily to be in a full-time vocational church ministry or parachurch ministry at this time in my life was really affirmed through the MBA. And then I already touched on the values of the specifically the Bethel MBA, that it focuses on leadership, faith, and ethics. Those 3 threads were woven throughout every single course in the program. And it's unlike any other MBA program in the country that I have experienced, just with those that I interact with and just through the research that I've done. And then we get into the 100,000-hour colloquy that Justin had mentioned in his intro, that the partnership between the seminary and the business school at Bethel. And that colloquy sparked my passion and interest and brought it up, kind of bubbled it up outside of me, this passion for the Work with Purpose initiative and the, breaking down the Sunday versus Monday, the sacred versus secular divide, and really was intrigued with that dialogue, the rich dialogue between the seminary students and their full calling from God to be in seminary full-time, and those of us that were in the business school, and those of us feeling called from God to be in the business school. And it was fun to have that kind of back and forth and the rich dialogue and what that looks like and what calling is on each one of our lives and how it's unique into that. And from there, so now I'm still in the MBA program. This was a couple of years ago, and a friend of mine, Ross Nelson, who was a graduate with his master's degree from Bethel as well, really have, both of us have a similar heart. We've been friends since we were like 3 or 4 years old, longtime friends. And we decided to co-launch a consulting practice called Spark Cadence, which focuses on better leaders, better lives, and the cadence, sparking a regular, healthy cadence in your life, an intentional rhythm of an integrated, holistic life, specifically for point leaders within organizations, to develop that healthy, holistic leader, in that you can do, find the cadence in your life and provide that steady balance for the people that you're leading at work, but also at home and in the community organizations that you're leading together to, again, have this integrated life together. That led to launching faithlife.work for me, my personal blog that launched at the first of this year of 2017, which focuses on faith, life, and work integration. You'll see the little fancy graphic that I put together there, the integration, not the balance. When I hear work-life balance, it just makes me cringe so much, because there's nothing about balancing work and life. It's life. Life is everything. It's all that you do. It's all that you're a part of. The community organizations, your family, the work, your hobbies, everything, all of it is integrated. There's no balancing. If you try to balance it, it's just going to all come crashing down at some point. It's just a matter of time. And with that, so Christ-centered life, the faith, life, work, this Venn diagram that you see, and in the middle of it, in the middle of everything is Christ. And in Acts 17:28, it says, "In him Paul writes this, in him we live and move and have our being. Advancing the kingdom, our calling in the workplace and where we're called, each and every one of us, where specifically we are today or next week, we're called to serve Christ and advance his kingdom exactly where we're at in whatever context we are. So I like this verse, this passage from Matthew 28, and I like the Message version of it. I'm just going to read it. So meanwhile, the 11 disciples were on their way to Galilee, headed for the mountain Jesus had set for their reunion. The moment they saw him, they worshipped him. Some, though, held back, not sure about worship, about risking themselves totally. Jesus, undeterred, went right ahead and gave his charge. God authorized and commanded me to commission you. Go out and train everyone you meet, far and near, in this way of life, marking them by baptism in the threefold name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Then instruct them in the practice of all I have commanded you. I'll be with you as you do this, day after day after day, right up to the end of the age. So this is called the Great Commission. We as Christians, as Christ followers, are called to go and baptize those in all nations and to tell others of Christ, no matter where we are. It doesn't matter if we're at work and we're in a secular workplace. We're supposed to call other people, to draw other people to Christ and to make him known to others. That doesn't mean carrying a Bible around wherever you are and thumping it over people's head when they swear or they say crude remarks or whatever, but it's finding it in a way that you find responsible in your context, but we're called to do that. And then we're also called in our workplace to do our best. The very core of what we're called to do, is to that Great Commission. But as we all find ourselves in our different contexts, our different work contexts, we're called to do what we do really well. Jesus himself was in the workplace. He was a carpenter. He worked. He had to work to make a living. And I like this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. If a man is called to be a street sweeper, he should sweep streets even as Michelangelo painted, or Beethoven composed music, or Shakespeare wrote poetry. He or she should sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will pause to say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. And taking it a step further now, doing your best, work really well, do everything to the glory of God. And in Colossians 3:22 says, don't just do the minimum that will get you by, do your best. Work from the heart for your real master, for God, confident that you'll get paid in full when you come into your inheritance. Keep in mind always that the ultimate master you're serving is Christ. Be a follower of Jesus. Don't cover up bad work. And that last phrase, that last sentence that Eugene Peterson puts in the Message, being a follower of Jesus doesn't cover up bad work. That's so rich. And if we do what we're called to do in our work context, no matter what it is, wherever you are, if you do poor or shoddy workmanship, that's going to reflect poorly on you and who you are, and therefore will reflect poorly on Christ. Christ calls us to do whatever we do, to do it really well, and to do it to the glory of God. So that's all great. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, that's awesome for you, Jon, because you like what you're doing, and you feel called to be at Mortenson, and you had this great MBA experience at Bethel. But maybe you, who are maybe watching this webcast right now, are thinking, yeah, but I don't really feel called to where I'm at. And it's a struggle for me to wake up on a Monday morning. And I can't wait till Friday at 5 o'clock when I can walk out the door and get home, because I really don't like what I'm doing. That's a valid question. I've been there. I've had a lot of those thoughts and discussions myself about my employment and where I'm at, which is why I've tried to supplement a little bit of my work, because I don't find full identity in my work working at Mortenson. I find my full identity in Christ and all the things that I do. But those are probably maybe some real questions that you're having. So I find value in a lot of different authors. Mainly the first one, obviously, is the source of truth, the Bible, and being in the Bible and the Word every day, or as much as you can, being in that and meditating on the Word daily is super valuable, but also from other perspectives. So Bill Hybels is somebody that I respect greatly. I attend the yearly Global Leadership Summit that Bill Hybels puts on through the Willow Leadership in South Barrington, Illinois. And he wrote a book recently called Simplify. And in this book, he talks about job alignment, and he highlights four areas to determine where if your current position is alignment with what your passion is, the culture that you hope to have in your employment, the challenge level, and compensation level of where you're at. All four very real things in your life that you're dealing with right now. So the first one, passion. Does your passion or does your job fit your area of passion? In other words, are you doing what you love doing? And if not, what can you do to bring this into alignment? Are there other areas within your employment, within your current job that you could do, that you can focus on, that you really enjoy doing? Are there other areas or aspects within your organization that you could plug into that you could find some of that passion? Maybe it's outside of your employment. Maybe it's a volunteer organization or a hobby or whatever it might be, but need to find that passion in your life. The second one is culture. And the question Bill asks is the culture of your workplace life-giving to you? And a lot of times we overlook culture because we don't think it necessarily matters. We go to a job or we think of a place of employment for a paycheck. It's a very transactional thing. But again, drawing here on a lot of Bethel wisdom, it's leadership and the way that we live as Christ followers. It's not a transactional leadership or a transactional way to lead others, but more of a transformational. How can I help someone else? And that plays into the cultural piece. And the second part of Bill Heibel's question is, if that culture is not necessarily healthy, what can you do to be a culture builder rather than a culture buster? And a part of what he means by that, are you sitting, are you talking with your coworkers and talking poorly about your boss or gossiping behind somebody else's back, or are you trying to do what you can to build up those around you in your team? The third one is challenge. Are you appropriately challenged at work? And there's kind of two sides, two dichotomies of being challenged at work, right? We all think, oh, it'd be so great, we could just go into work and we could kind of coast a little bit, maybe surf the internet, and then after a couple of hours if you're not challenged and you're surfing the internet and you feel bored at work, that's, in my opinion, worse than being over challenged at work and too busy at work. So that's the flip side, not being challenged enough or being too challenged. And so what Bill asks, what changes do you need to make or what conversations do you need to have to right size your challenge level in order for it to be, to make you the best person that you can be? And the final one is compensation. So which is pretty important this day and age with mortgages and other bills that we have to pay. If pay and passion are not aligned in your current job, which solution below will lead to the most satisfying alignment for you? So the first one there you see in the little letters underneath the red text. So low pay, high passion equals supplement your pay. So that means if your current position provides low pay for you right now or lower than what you think you're worth, but you have super high passion, you're excited about what you're doing, you can't wait to get there, you jump out of bed in the morning and can't wait to do what you're doing, you need to find a way to supplement your pay because you just can't pay the bills doing what you're doing. That might be a situation you're in. Or you might be in a situation where you have really high pay, but you have low passion area for what you're doing. And in that case, if you're getting compensated immensely for what you're doing, but you drag your feet and you do whatever you can to not get into work. Monday morning is the worst. Friday afternoon is the best. You need to find a way to supplement your passion. Again, finding that either at your current place of employment, finding a different place of employment, or supplementing that with volunteering or hobbies or family or friends, or finding different ways that you can fill that kind of passion hole that might be in your heart. So with that, I end on a really cool picture that I like because it's my family. And this obviously is not how we look all the time. So any of you who are married or who have friends or families, this is not what life looks like 100% of the time. But for me, this is how I view it. my family. We love life, and we do our best to try to live life to the fullest, to live an integrated life of our full-time engagements that we are both committed to, our kids' schools that they're involved with, our church, and just being silly and being together. And to me, this represents Christ as well, and how he views us. He looks at
Wonderful.
us just with a
Thanks so much.
smiling heart, because
I think one of the things that
God
I so
created
appreciate
us
about
to
your
do great
story
things
is
in this
you've
world,
had
to
these
make a
brushes with
difference, to
seminary
be where
time,
we're at, to
and
live an
you
integrated
know, it sounds
life,
like one
and to
was
share
Greek
his
and you
gospel
did
and
some
his
Hebrew
good news
with
that
others.
this world is so thirsting for in the
That's right.
marketplaces
That's
that
right.
we're in today,
But
each and
you're a
every one of
person
us.
who loves the
So with that, I'm
church.
going to give it back
You
to, or
care
not necessarily give
deeply
it back,
about
but
the life
I'll
of the
invite Justin to
church
join back here for some
in
interaction
a
and some
formal sense,
questions
right? The church
from
gather,
there.
the local church context. And yet you were in the season of kind of trying to really solidify what is God calling you to, and through these various stints at North Park and then at Bethel Seminary, this clarification came about for you that your calling, your kingdom calling,
Intense
is to
Greek,
reach out in
yes.
the marketplace. I just think that's such a fascinating side of the story. I'd like to throw out a question or two just to get things rolling, and we've got some good chat questions already rolling in, and we'll jump to those in a second. But let me just phrase it this way: you know, you've had this kind of the light bulb coming on as you described regarding faith work integration. It's not about trying to balance these diverse things, but it's about living a life in an integrated way. Uh, how have you had churches come alongside you? And it could be pastors that have come alongside you or the church community in general. How have they come alongside you in ways that have either helped further this integrative life approach as a marketplace leader, or ways that they could grow in, you know, areas that maybe they missed it and are still improving in? So, thinking from the lens of the church and pastoral ministry, what have been wins for you, and where are some areas of growth that you see for the church and for church leaders?
Yeah, so I'll start very early on in my formative years. And my grandfather, Bill Carlson, was a very prominent businessman in Mankato, Minnesota, and he entrepreneur started his own very successful business back in 1948. And what his purpose and goal was to give his money away to the church and other organizations so they could be successful. He himself felt called into full-time ministry, but didn't feel called to be a pastor. But it was his purpose to help those who felt called, including my father, to be called into full-time ministry. And he was able to financially support those who did that. So early on in my formative years, from my church experiences, that spoke into who I am. Fast forwarding into my now more
I'm going to try to
modern
group together some
church
questions.
interaction
We have some
experience,
questions coming
there
in
hasn't
from
been any necessarily
Lynn,
a
and
formal,
some questions from Amy and
workshop
Kevin.
or small
Let me
group
group a
studies or
couple
anything like
questions
that.
before
It's
we get
been
to
more of from
ours.
the
They
pulpit.
seem to be
There's been
asking
some,
about
maybe
sort of
some
on the
sermon
ground
series based on
in
Timothy
actual
Keller's
everyday
Every Good
work. What
Endeavor
does it look like
book, which
to
is a
integrate your
fantastic book
faith
that I
in that
recommend for
context?
all
Do you
those
have
listening
anything
in,
that you can share
and other
on a
various
day-to-day basis? What
sermon
does it
topics
look
that
like
speaks to
for
this
you?
kind of sacred secular work and where we're all called to be at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I mentioned it a little bit where you don't have to bring a Bible and beat everybody on the head with it, and that's not my approach. nor is it an approach that I think necessarily works that well. So what I do from a day-to-day standpoint and how I live out my faith is very first, I do my job to the best of my abilities. That is the foundation of how I live out my faith. And some people might question, like, well, yeah, but that's not like an overt way that you can show where you're following Christ. And I would dispute that, and I would say that that is the foundation, the core of it. And then from there, what I do is I find little ways to kind of pepper in some discussion. So this global leadership summit that I attend every August. I might tweet something, or I might invite a few people from Mortenson to share in that experience with me, which is a Christian-based leadership summit that has secular speakers as well. And then even so, there was an interaction that I had with you, Justin, on a radio program about a month ago, and something I do with my meetings that I host at Mortenson is a lot of times I'll either ask people what their best part of the weekend was, or what's something they're looking forward to in the coming week, or something they did with their family over the holidays that was really cool that they wanted to share with people. And so that just opens up the door to talk about non-work things. And a lot of times people's volunteering comes up with their church organizations. But for me, that experience on that radio program with you and Tessa was just a subtle thing that I didn't speak as to what the radio program was. I just said I was able to share some of my experiences on work and faith. That's all I had to say on a radio program. And then after that kind of little introduction on the meeting, there was a break in the meeting, and as we had lunch, somebody came up to me and he said, "Hey, tell me a little bit more about that. What does that mean?" And so we started interacting a little bit more, and where my passion area is with integrating work, life, and faith. And he said, "Actually, I'm a Christian. That's really cool that you're also a Christian in this concept, in this context, in the construction world." And so we were able to have that dialogue, and then it just springs from there. So that's one specific example.
As well, maybe they're coming even from a different faith perspective, but they're not expected to check that at the door either. There's some freedom given to people in these conversations. Amy had asked, if you had any specific examples of how a work decision influenced your faith. So you might want to follow up on that. But then we're also going to go back to some questions that I think Ben Lim had asked as well. After that. But let me just quickly throw out that question Amy had about how has your faith influenced decisions that you've made in the work context? Mhm.
Yeah, so there's numerous examples that can be provided, and not just in my work context, but in every person that's on this webinar right now, that you could probably think of different specific examples that you've been maybe challenged at work to make the right decision, or something that might go counterintuitive to your Christian faith. And I've certainly been put in some of those situations, not a lot. But there's been some ethical, I'll say, gray areas that I've been involved with that I definitely need to fall back on what my training is as a Christ follower, what I know of not just kind of traditional good values and ethics found in Proverbs, but also just my training in the biblical world. And so I've been able to rely on that experience and that training to guide what decision I need to make, and I've been able to make a stand for what I know is the right thing to do. That in the end, it probably hurt my career in some of those decisions, but I knew it was the right thing to do.
Inform them in making good decisions. So, I'm as a person who works in the church context and the seminary context, I love hearing stories of how Christians are out engaged in the marketplace and wrestling with difficult decisions. And that really is kind of the foundation of approaching things from an ethical standpoint. Now, Ben had asked about the context of international engagement and how sometimes countries are coming with a more authoritarian approach. He raises up the example of China or some Islamic countries, and then phrases that have you had any international experience that you could speak to, and how does faith work relate when you kind of weave in intercultural differences as well in the global economy that we're a part of?
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity, not a lot for international, but a few years ago, I was able to have the opportunity to work with some projects over in Guam. And it's a U.S. territory, so it's kind of international, but kind of not. But they have a very different way of doing business over in Guam. And again, not that it's necessarily ethical black and white, right and wrong, but just navigating those different ways of how they, for instance, how they would get meetings with certain influential people, and how Mortenson would need to get a meeting with an influential person, and maybe having to do things that you wouldn't normally do here in the United States, to get in front of or have FaceTime with the right person. And Mortenson, being of upstanding ethical and moral values, chose not to go down some of those gray area routes, because that's just not how we do business. And so, being involved with some of those decisions and understanding and seeing how my leadership at Mortenson handled some of those things and the reasons why we chose not to do that, were it was encouraging for me as an employee of that organization. We also, a few years ago, we had an office in China, and we wouldn't actually build anything, do construction in China with a lot of the rules and regulations they have with some of their home turf laws and things like that. But we would be more consultants for that. And we had a number of projects that we did with Disney, Walt Disney World, English as second language for them, some centers there, work with the National Basketball Association, so some pretty influential large projects.
That's the issue.
And again, just seeing some of the ways that they do business is just it's just a different way of doing things. And to see the Mortenson values and ethics play out from a leadership standpoint was really awe-inspiring, and just reaffirmed that I was in the right place of employment, that I was working for a good employer.
The second part of the question: does the Christian believe that business should only be guided by driving shareholder profit? How might you respond to that? That's a great question that I think is important for Christians to wrestle with.
Yeah, Taylor, thanks for the question. Love it. So, when I was wrestling with seminary the first time, I was meeting with a pretty influential leader within the Evangelical Covenant Church denomination, and he was a mentor of mine at the time, and his sole motivation should have been to get me into seminary so that I could start pumping my tuition dollars into an organization that he was helping to lead, and further see somebody else be in full-time vocational ministry. But I'll never forget the advice that he gave me as I was kind of asking him and wrestling with this seminary discussion. And he said, Jon, if there aren't people like you in the workplace, in the marketplace, who are good Christian men and women, we can't afford ministry. We can't do what we're doing, right? And even Jesus's disciples all had part-time jobs. They were fishermen. They were tent makers. They had to bring in money in order to make the ministry work. And so is profit a bad thing? Absolutely not. Because without profit, the church wouldn't exist. Without money, without revenue, we wouldn't be able to go and provide Bibles and help spread the word of Christ to those who haven't heard it before. So it is a good thing. Money is an okay thing. It's when we start to worship that money and that becomes our sole driver of why we're doing what we're doing. That's where the root of all evil comes from. That's where money is a bad thing. As far as the second part of the question being, should we only look out for, I think it was, should we look out for the stakeholders and not only for our own gains? Um, obviously all the shareholders that are involved, whether you're working for a public organization or a privately held organization, you need to understand what the drivers are for making that organization work, right? And so taking into account all the shareholders that are involved, if you just ignore, if you're a public company and you ignore the stockholders, you're not going to last that long. You're going to go under. Same as if you work for a private organization and you only care about your own personal gain, your own profitable gain, you're not going to last that long in that organization either. So inherently, you need to be aware of who you're working for, who you're working with, and why you're working, what the motivation is of what you're working for.
I was just excitedly sharing with this individual that they had just hired their 100th employee at this organization. And it just is a refreshing reminder that, good companies, good businesses are providing livelihoods for families. They're providing meaningful products and services. So it's not just the instrumental value that work has, but there's intrinsic value in the work itself. I mean, you're sharing about the design phase work. I always think that's would be an interesting question to kind of hear you talk a little bit about as well. Is how does your actual work, the work itself, how is that valuable? What's the value you see that you contribute in that design phase work that you're a part of? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I go back to the foundational core, right? So the very essence of why we work is to do it well and to use that work as an act of worship to God. And in the design phase work that I do, I focus on healthcare. And so it's pretty easy for me to make that connection of the value of the work that I'm helping to contribute to, literally saving lives. And somebody might think that's kind of crazy to make that leap, but by the design phase efforts that I, along with the design team, puts together by designing a fully functional, really integrated, efficient hospital, we can save lives. And the people that are walking in the door of that healthcare facility are looking for ways to maybe not just a regular routine checkup, but somebody who goes into the ER and they need to get seen as fast as possible to save their life. And by incorporating good design practices and principles and being good stewards of our customers' money to build an efficient building, that can save lives. And so for me, it's easy to make that connection. If you're in construction and you're building things that maybe don't have some of that intrinsic value, like I won't name necessarily specific building types, but you could probably think of some of I'll use an easy one, right? So if you're building casinos, it might be a little bit hard to find that intrinsic connection to how God is using you in your work, perhaps.
Comments about even making that jump from design phase to helping the healthcare industry work well and thrive well. We had a couple questions about the church in particular. One was kind of phrasing it around what are some of the differences of the church in a formal sense, the local ecclesiastical body, and the life of the individual Christian in the workplace. That there might be some differences between the way I would phrase it as the work of the church gathered versus the work of the church scattered, individual Christians out. So maybe hold on to that question of the differences between those two. And then Alyssa also asked the question around compensation and how to be thinking about compensation and profit when you're looking at volunteer versus paid roles within the church. So I'll kind of give you those two broad categories and talk to us a little bit about your perspective of the church from a marketplace vantage point. Yeah.
Yeah, well, first of all, somebody who my dad is in full-time vocational ministry, my brother-in-law is in full-time vocational ministry, my brother and sister-in-law are in full-time vocational ministry. I will advocate that full-time vocational ministers and those in schools should get paid more. So that's just a little plug that I have for that. And again, a lot of times when you're discerning if you should be in full-time, vocational ministry in a ministry setting like a church or a parachurch ministry, it is kind of that wrestling concept of I want to go do this and I have passion for this, but I don't think I can support my family in doing it, and that's a real wrestling issue that many men and women today have. Should I go to seminary, get into debt big time, and then go into a full-time position that won't pay me what I need to get paid to live a kind of life that I want to live? And that shouldn't be the case. Now, however, there's also the flip side of it, that money isn't everything, and God promises to give us what we need in every situation, right? And Paul himself, as he's like sitting in jail, he's excited about, I've seen it all. I've been on the mountaintop, I've been in the lows, and in every one of those situations, God has provided for me. And so that's the trust that we have, no matter what we're called to do, if it's in the secular or sacred, is to have that trust. If God is calling you into that context, that He will take care of you. And it might not be the life that you think you want to live in terms of comfort, or the car you want to drive, or the house you want to live in, or that kind of thing, but to have that faith that God will provide for you.
Baptism question, or you can just give us some more.
Explain a little bit more, Justin, maybe the question on the scattered and that question.
Needed as
if you could expound on that a little bit for
and
me.
how does that complement the work of individual Christians as the church scattered? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, the early church forming in Ecclesiastes, or not Ecclesiastes, but Acts, the Acts 2 church, right? And forming together and having that is really important, and that Sunday gathering, the Sabbath, is a thing. I mean, Sabbath, God Himself rested on the seventh day after He worked, by the way, and God called His work really good. He rested. And we are called to rest as well. And part of that rest is joining with other believers in a common community and learning and sharing and strengthening our relationship with Him. So the gathered church is super important. It's very biblical. And then as far as being the kind of scattered church, or doing things outside of the church, That for me, the church, the Sunday, whether you meet on a Sunday morning or Saturday night or whenever it is, that's the launching pad. That's the incubator for what we're doing as Christ followers, and as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And to go from there now out into our worldly context and take what we've learned on that Sunday morning or Saturday evening context and take it into our work lives. Now, as far as the specific baptism question, love it. Great theological question. That's great. But that's why you're here, Justin, to answer those theological questions. But specifically answering that, if somebody were to ask me and they felt comfortable saying, "Hey, John, I believe in Christ," I'd be comfortable, and I've led other people, have had that humbling experience to lead others to Christ before. But as far as baptism, I guess personally, I'm more in the camp of, let's let somebody who's trained and really understand in the full sacrament and word of the Lord do the baptism, and really that it is a holy sacrament. I'm a firm, strong believer in that. And not that I couldn't do it, I just don't feel called to do that. And I'd rather have somebody who's called and trained in that full sacrament and word to do that.
I'll close our time.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So, a couple of books and authors, from just a challenge standpoint, for my almost entire life, it has been a challenge for me to be in the Word every day. And just in the last couple of years, again, discovering myself and who I am through the MBA program, was able to get integrated into doing the best that I can to be in the Word every single day. And in Psalm 1, chapter 1, verse 1, paraphrasing here, but it talks about those who study God's Word day in and day out and love the law, love God's law, will be like trees at a riverbank, and their leaves will blossom and be green and will be shown to others. And it's interesting about that passage. It doesn't talk about work really hard and you'll be rewarded. No, it talks about really meditate and press into God's law and love God's law, and then you will flourish and you'll be a light to others. So that's a passage amongst many others. I've shared a couple here during the webcast. So from a biblical standpoint, that would be the case. And then as far as authors, a really formative one for me was Every Good Endeavor by Timothy Keller. And I had the chance to read that before the 100,000 Hour Colloquy, and then got to re-engage in it again during the colloquy. And I would encourage those of you who are listening in to read that book. Really, really good book. A Christian faith-based book from Timothy Keller, who's a pastor in New York City. As well as another one by Tom Nelson, who's another friend of Bethel University. Work Matters is another really good one. And then kind of a more secular book that I've really enjoyed is called Do-Over by Jon Acuff. And for those who don't know Jon Acuff, there's Work Matters. Justin was holding it up. So those of you who don't know Jon Acuff, he's a fantastic Christian guy, but doesn't come across as Christian-y in his authoring, but really funny guy, good, engaging. So if you're looking at maybe a do-over on your career, looking to do something different, that's a really good book that I would recommend. And then just in closing, really just want to, again, thank you, Justin, for the chance to engage and participate and work with purpose, and just really affirm you and encourage you in the work that you're doing here at Bethel Seminary, the work that you're doing to engage pastors into working with purpose and engage the secular community, the workplace, marketplace into church is just a natural thing. Integrating it together is what God has called us to do, and you're doing really great things.
We also will have an event with Amy Sherman, author of the book Kingdom Calling, and just a rich unpacking of why everyday work matters as part of Kingdom Calling. Jon is in ministry at Mortenson Construction. It's a part of a kingdom call that he has. And you all have calls in diverse sectors as well. So we want to highlight those and celebrate those. Our Work with Purpose website has many resources you can draw upon. Come visit the seminary at seminary.bethel.edu to see some of our programs. If you want to learn more about Work with Purpose, come to seminary.bethel.edu/work-with-purpose. And we have a number of video offerings there, a series of TED Talk kinds of examples, and other resources. We'd love to support you as you think about faith-work integration in your own life. Thanks for joining us today, and again, thank you, Jon, for being with us. Take care, everybody.